What's your emergency?
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the PIO Podcast, a place to discuss all public information-related topics for police, fire, EMS, and local and federal government organizations.
It was a good learning experience for a lot of us that social media is not real life.
But we have to remember the media are very rarely a target audience. They're simply that conduit.
Our words have impacts on individuals, and it may not be positive. So just being thoughtful and mindful of the words that we speak.
I think what's so interesting about this position too, and this job and this profession, is that every one of us is looking for purpose, and when we find it here, that's it.
To know is that a crisis for one is not necessarily a crisis for another.
This episode is sponsored by the Social Media Strategy Summit, the leading provider of social media education. They host annual events designed specifically for government communications professionals like you to help you build and engage your communities through social media. Visit their website at socialmediastrategiessummit.com to learn more and use promo code PIO Podcast for 10% off of your registration. Good afternoon. Today on the PIO Podcast, we have Shawna Bruce from MD Bruce and Associates Ltd. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you for being on this show.
Thank you, Robert, for inviting me to be on the show. It's great to finally meet you in person after all our social media interactions.
I know, it's so great to put a face to the name, and obviously I've seen you speak before, but we've never had a chance to interact one-on-one via, remotely, but it's still cool, and I hope to meet you one day in person.
Yeah, it's true. I said in person, but this feels almost in person because I feel this whole virtual approach is the way we're going, quite a bit since COVID. So, either way, pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yep. I'm glad to have you here. So, Shawna, let's talk about your background first. Why don't you tell our listeners about your background and how you got to running your own, firm?
How did we get here? Well, I served over 25 years as an Army Public Affairs officer in the Canadian Forces, and during that time I supported a lot of domestic operations, and along the way I got interested a bit in disaster and emergency management. So I transitioned out of the military and I took on a role as the public affairs leader for Dow Chemical's Canadian operations here, and I did a lot of emergency engagement with local communities, preparing teams for crisis communication. So when I transitioned out in 2018, I retired from Dow. I started working with organizations to help prepare them to communicate during their next crisis. That's kind of my sweet spot right there. So yeah, I've probably been doing this comm stuff for about 40 years.
Wow. All right. I didn't realize you had been doing it that long, but obviously the military career, that adds to it. So your firm has a really broad spectrum of communication related services, from crisis communications. You do media training. You step in for emergency public information. You communicate your communication for emergency management stuff. You create communication plans and exercises, and then you run social media for a lot of these organizations too. How many people are in your firm?
It's a team of one. I'm a team of one with some associates that I work with, especially on the media training side. I know it looks like I can't focus, doesn't it? It probably goes back to everything that I offer to clients is something someone has asked me to do with them along the way. That's how, jack of all trades. You kind of hope by this time in your career you're master of a few, but anything that touches public information and communications, that's my sandbox. I want to be out there, delivering workshops that create confidence and capacity in comms teams. So everything from the exercises and comms plan, they're all pretty specific to the crisis space, to communications. And that's kind of where I like to work.
Okay. So regular communications is not necessarily your thing, but what's the difference between a regular communications plan and a crisis communications plan?
Well, it's interesting because if I could say, here in Canada, we don't operate with the same PIO model that you guys have in the US, right? I'm quite envious of that model. And we have a lot of gaps with our corporate and municipal comms teams because they're stepping into emergency or crisis or disaster, realities, and they may not have the training and skills to shift from the regular to the crisis. And with me, I always think the biggest differentiator is time, right? With everyday comms, we have time to do the research, the planning, to implement, to evaluate. You can bring all the key players together, discuss a strategy. But in crisis comms, you're likely never to have all the information you need before you need to start communicating, and you have to go with what you know and then keep updating. So you're making those decisions really quickly, and you have to work in that fast-paced, tempo, stressful environment. So I think there's a huge difference between how you work every day and how you pivot to support a crisis in your organization.
All right, so what are the essential elements in crisis communication messages?
Well, personally, I feel, first of all, you need to take accountability for what happened. It's us. We did it. We're bad. You need to take accountability.
Real quick, before you jump off onto the next one, accountability is such an interesting one because there have been so many mistakes with corporations in the last 6 months, from Bud Light to Target to, there was another one. I can't think of the other one that pops off of my brain, but none of them took accountability.
You have to be accountable. You have to take accountability. Like that's how you're starting to build trust back with that audience that's been impacted by your crisis. And you have to apologize. If you're at fault, you have to apologize and actually say, like, we apologize. Don't beat around the bush there. Then you need to be outlining the actions you're going to take to fix that issue that went wrong in the first place, and then follow up and do it. Talk the talk, and then walk the walk by doing it. I would say, depending on what kind of crisis you're managing here, you have to lead with empathy and compassion for anyone that's been impacted by your crisis event. And you need to sound human when you talk that way. You need to connect. Some people are very robotic or very corporate. They have sort of the legal key messages that have been revised for them. But at the end of the day, that comes off so cold and unfeeling. And it doesn't establish that much needed trust, because you're never going to move past that crisis unless they trust you that you're actually doing what you said you're going to do, and they actually believe that it's being done. So that's what I think is so critically important there.
And you bring up the thing about making it feel human. And I think one of the most interesting things I've seen recently here in the States is you have chiefs and executives from communities come forward, and they're talking like a parent, like a teacher, like a doctor, and they're putting their emotion into it. And I think that's important. There's nothing wrong with using a little bit of emotion and showing that you have a different side than just that figurehead of the agency.
Well, and that you're human, right? That you have a human side in that. And I think whenever you can have a situation, and police and those that are in the communities, they often see firsthand or have an opportunity to chat or talk firsthand sadly to the victims or the families of those victims. So they are getting an up close and personal, really perspective on how that crisis or death or fatality or event has impacted a family. So they, I feel, can absorb that emotion and come across empathetic. I think what's challenging is when you have CEOs that are so far removed, so many layers removed from the actual most impacted audiences here about their event. Like, let's say, how many times do you ever see a CEO of an airline talking to the families of victims from a crash? Never? Rarely. I mean, I don't know really, but I think it's far removed.
I can think of one. The Malaysia Airlines, disappearance in, Malaysia. The plane that disappeared. I remember the CEO coming and talking to the families on that one because it was just such a bizarre circumstance.
Well, I'm going to have to look that up now, Robert, because if having done that, having been a leader being out there and leading that crisis by being there for the families. I bet you his statement afterwards to the media was very heartfelt. I think when we talk about, our thoughts and prayers, it gets very empty, very, very fast.
Mm-hmm.
And we need new ways to do that. I worked with a commander once in the Army, and he would meet every family of our fallen soldiers, and he would insist on writing his own messages for media. Public affairs didn't write those for him. He wrote his own, and they were always so empathetic and compassionate when he shared them. And I think that's the difference.
It matters. It really does. It absolutely does matter. Okay. Let us talk about, how does a message map help a PIO control their message?
I love message maps. I'm like the biggest cheerleader for message maps for people in their crisis comms plan. I teach it in every workshop, and I know they originate from a risk comms perspective, but a message map just allows you to articulate those 3 key messages clearly, and then you can share that message map with your key spokesperson and any other people in your organization or other agencies that are also responding to the questions. And I think that it literally allows you to keep everyone on the same page. So if, managing the message, controlling your own narrative, if you are giving people something to talk about with your key message map, and you say, this is the focus, but, Mr. Police Chief, you're going to add your take on it from what your officers did for the response, and the fire chief is going to add their take on how they manage the actual putting out the fire. Everyone will bring in their own perspective, but they're pushing out those same key messages. And I think that's how you control that narrative. So it's a great tool. I highly recommend them.
I love message maps. I think they're phenomenal. And I think sometimes they're overlooked, in a lot of crisis plans. And I think there's a use for them in keeping your message consistent. I agree.
And I would say to you that we both know, we're professionals. We know you're not going to take it and verbatim use it. You're going to have to tweak it. But in a crisis, when you don't have that time, how much better is it to start from a draft? It's always better to start with a draft in front of you. So when I think about, I worked once with a post-secondary, and they had 0 message mapping in their plan anywhere. And I'm thinking to myself, crisis on campus. What's the first thing we think about, right? Armed intruder,
yep.
Run, hide, fight, escape, hide, fight, whatever you're using for those 3 actions. But those actions are never changing, right? So if you had a message map that's already in your plan, and you're ready to pull out those bullet points, and one message of 90 words is a nice social media message. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's there for you. Why would you not have it? But I recognize it's for some it's a new concept for them.
Yep, I completely agree. Can you talk about communicating effectively with stakeholders during a crisis?
Let's take a quick break.
I think it would be useful at least to experiment, and I know some universities have started to experiment with this, but experiment with having, a required course maybe for all students entering the university. They used to have a course at my university, which was like here's how to go to college class, here's how to study and things like that. They don't have that course anymore, but instead of having something like that, have a course that, shows students, here's the history of free speech, here's how it.
I can, but I would say to you that the work with communicating effectively with your audiences starts well before that crisis.
Very
You
important.
need to know, you need to know who your audiences are, and almost more importantly, where they're going to get their information, because that's where you need to have a presence. I've seen corporations that put everything out on their Twitter space, yet their local site communities are using Facebook to communicate. So, yeah, we don't do Facebook. Well, yeah, but your entire community is on Facebook, so you at least need to be listening to that Facebook page.
Right.
So, I also think that community networks, like existing community networks, that they're often underutilized. I like to call it a COIN, a community outreach information network. You can't be expected as a PIO to touch everyone with your message, right? You're not going to touch every audience that needs to get that info. But what if you could create a network that you send information to, and then they sent it out to the seniors in your community or the youth groups, agricultural societies, faith groups, at-risk populations. These audiences already have a relationship with those organizations, right? So that organization is a trusted source for them in most cases. So just think how much more amplification and dissemination you'd have with those messages if you did that little bit of work up front to say, right, I may not be able to reach everyone, but hey, if I reach these 20 organizations as well as the general public with my social media, whatever feeds, I'll probably get a pretty good grip on who needs to have this info. So I think utilizing, if you know who your audiences are, where they're going for info, have a presence, and look across your communities to develop that network now.
You know, I call that banking, and I'm a big firm believer of that. If you bank goodwill and you bank good practices of communicating to your community, that when you make mistakes or when staff make mistakes, and then you're forthright about it, that they are not only more forgiving, but they're also very defensive for you. And they will fight for you in the Twitter space, in the Facebook groups, and in the community to support you.
I 100% agree that I love that banking analogy you've given there, Robert. And I think on top of that, that if you're establishing some kind of communication and rapport with them beforehand, they kind of know a little bit about who you are. If you're communicating the good, the bad, and the ugly, you know, that's important too, because that's humanizing you as your organization, the face of your org as well. So I think there's a lot that can be learned there. You know, it's not the time to be getting a Twitter, you know, presence on the day that everything's blown up in your organization.
Oh my God. You know, I look back to the Ferguson, Missouri incident that happened. And I always, whenever something like that happens somewhere else, I go backwards. I look what they did before the event and then what did they do forward. And their Twitter account in Ferguson, Missouri had it was 3 or 4 years old, had not been updated in 3 or 4 years. And then, of course, obviously it started, and then they were silent in the public and social media for 4.5 days before a statement actually came out. I mean, incredible.
Well, and that's, you know, and then if you think past that too, I mean, even with, I remember in Pennsylvania back in March, they had the chocolate factory explosion, and tragedy struck, and they're still not, maybe I just haven't gone back and read up all the details, but at the end of the day, they weren't able to use anything that they had. They hadn't updated their website in 2 years. There was nothing on their website, but also it had impacted some of their key players, right? Bless them. They lost their HR director, I believe, in that explosion, because their corporate offices were right there. So they were actually they didn't have any access to any of the vehicles or the mediums that they own themselves, their website and what have you. They couldn't get access to anything. So they were using the first responders on the ground to relay information to the families of those that were killed in that explosion. So it was a very interesting thing until they could get externally, till they could get up and running, till they could get access to it. Then they started using Facebook, but there was a delay because of the circumstances too, which we have to think about.
Right. Are there any tools that can be used to help in crisis communications?
Well, I think the first tool you have to have is a plan. You have to have an effective communications plan that is absolutely purpose-written for your organization. There's no two plans out there that should ever be the same. Everyone has different audiences, risks, scenarios, procedures, and realities. You need a plan that's written with all those key players, not just the comms team, right? You need your human resources people, safety folks, your fire people, your emergency management, even your lawyer, leadership. You need to have these wholesome discussions, and then maybe the comms team goes away and writes a plan that everyone has had an opportunity to contribute to. And then when you're going to give the buy-in for it, getting it signed off, everyone knows what's happening. But in that plan, I go back to our favorite message maps, you know, even your news release, your media advisory templates? Do you have the right logo, the right boilerplate info, the right contact info? Can you just run with it when it's in there? So I feel the plan is the first start. And then I would say another tool, if you can, is a dark or microsite, a black site, where you've got all that
Firm believer of that.
Offline, organized, like I feel I'm a strong believer that your website should be your communications hub in a crisis, and everything you put on social should link back to that hub, because you can organize your website. You can make info easy to find. You can have maps, FAQs, Q&A areas with your leadership, videos. You can have it all there and educate people when you get them into your site. So I feel the microsite is a good tool, and your social media feeds, that they're well established, like we said, and your audiences know where to go for trusted information. So in my mind, those are the top 3 tools that you can have in your toolbox ready to go and prepared in advance.
I can't agree more about having the microsite or the black site that you can turn on when you need to. I go back to the Idaho murders last year where the 4 college students were killed, and the sheriff's department and the police department put together a microsite page where they had the information that they wanted to get out, and also a way for community members to submit information. So it was going, instead of coming through on a phone call or on social media, it was coming through that one platform, so they were able to manage the information that was coming in.
And I've seen the other side of that, where community during a major flood incident here in Canada took the whole municipal website and kind of made it the crisis website. But then, there's Joe, and Joe's not impacted by the flood. He just wanted to know if his garbage is being picked up on Tuesday, right? The municipality still has to govern the residents that live there, right? The citizens that are there. So it was a good lesson for them that, put a banner across the top for flood information. Click here, take it away, and then have all your information there. And let's think about some of that, what can be pre-packed in there, right? If you're prone to tornadoes, all the information about watch or warning. If you're prone to wildfires, evacuation information, or even, coming back into your homes after you're re-entering, all of this information is required at one phase of that emergency, maybe during response, maybe during recovery. But by having it consolidated, it's certainly making the role of the PIO or the comms team, it's making it much easier for them. And now all of your residents or your publics, your audiences, they know where to go to get the right information from the source.
Right. So we've already kind of talked about the value of having social media and have it pre-set up and having a good active presence. But are there any best practices for managing social media during a crisis?
Well, I think there's some steps you can take that will definitely support you in your crisis. I mean, I would say the first one is, the one that people often forget, pause your pre-programmed messaging. So pause anything you had loaded up in Hootsuite or whatever you're using, and just focus on the crisis at hand. You don't want to be a situation where you're a company that just had a fatality situation or explosion, and yet your pre-programmed message is honoring all your employees for their big safety award they just won. Right. So, and we've seen some things where that's happened, right? So pause that pre-programmed messages, focus on the crisis. And then I would say establish a hashtag that you're going to be using, establish it, make sure you put it out correctly with the title case or however you're managing that it's written. So alt text is included in that, but you establish your hashtag, so that someone else isn't calling, your crisis more of a disparaging name that might not reflect well upon your organization. Right. And then pin, Molly McPherson mentioned this the other day when we first saw the team with the tragic situation fatalities we saw. They pinned the tweet to the top of their social feed. If I were doing that and it were me, I'd be pinning it and telling people where to go for the updates on my website, but pin it to the top so that everyone that opens up and finds you sees that message in there. So I think those are really important. And then the most other thing is monitor, right? We know it's not one and done. If You need to be monitoring what's out there to correct misinformation and keep on top of it.
So, Shawna, the monitoring part, in your organization, the one person doing it all, and in vast majority of public information officers, they're doing it all too. So, are there apps or other ways that they can help monitor that information coming in?
There's a few out there, and I have different clients that they'll use Hootsuite or I think it's Talkwalker. Sprout Social has one. Brandwatch has one. Mention is another one. They are out there, but I'll be honest, a lot of my clients, they don't have the budget to hire that, right? They don't have a budget to be able to do that. So what we've talked about is, and obviously if a PIO is a team of one or one and a half, I always joke, they're not going to be in that position to monitor that social media. But I'm a true believer that as the PIO, we always kind of talk about it as a position, but it needs to be a team, right? A team. You need minions. You need assistants to help you. When I was at Dow Canada, I was a team of one. And my corporate headquarters were amazing, supportively to support, but they were in Midland, Michigan. I'm in Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta. We're provinces apart, miles apart. There was no way that team was going to be able to do anything fast enough for me if I was dealing with a chemical release, right? So we had to be self-sufficient. And one of the things that we did is I hired from within. I had engineers and HR people and safety folks and administrators come together with me as my public affairs on-call team. And I trained them to do jobs that needed to be done. So media monitoring, or running your media log and taking calls, escorting media if you need to. These are all things that they could be taught how to do, but never ever put them in front of camera, never put them in making a career limiting statement in that kind of situation, right? But I would say to you that having people, they don't even have to be on site with you, that are monitoring that don't have a job created with the crisis, is almost better than a system, because they can bring stuff to you and you're getting that human perspective. As long as you have a feedback loop that it's coming to the PIO, and the PIO can take it and bring it up to whoever he needs to, if you're working in ICS, your incident commander, or whomever, just to make sure that you're getting that constant feedback loop. Because a lot of good intelligence comes through your audiences and social media, right? They're on the ground truthing. And so, or challenges. So it's great free research, right? It's a great way to be saying, maybe we do have a problem over here because 7 people have mentioned this issue at the evacuation or the comfort center. So
right.
I guess so. I'm just saying that sometimes we automatically go to hiring someone, which if you have the money and you don't have the resources, go for it. But if you need another alternative, maybe you look at the man-made option or the woman-made option there.
Right. To be honest, not every agency, organization, business has a crisis every day. So in reality, you only need them to come together for that 24, 48, 36-hour event. And then they can go back to work.
Then they could go back to work. And you know what? This is where, I always say you still have to be strategic with social. So as much as I respect all the younger generation that totally have a grip on this way better than I ever will in my life, my own kids, right? There's a balance there. There's still strategic direction that's required from the voice of experience to be balancing that. But when you're monitoring, by all means, bring all those social media savvy people in that know all the websites that are out there and what's out there, and get them to be active listening for you.
Right.
Social listening, really.
Right. Exactly. So misinformation and inaccurate information is frequently posted on social media. How does the PIO or the person that's monitoring that stuff, how should they be addressing that inaccurate or misinformation that comes out?
It is a big problem. And so I'm going to ask you a question back on this one, Robert. Do you think sometimes that misinformation is out there because we as PIOs or organizations didn't establish ourselves maybe as that trusted and credible source of info soon enough?
That is very possible that they they don't have a presence that's established and people know that you go to this Twitter handle only for information. So I think that does happen at times. I think a lot of times agencies they're too used to having that one particular platform. As we're always showing fun stuff. We're doing the ice bucket challenge, or we're doing the newest dance, or whatever it is. The reality of it is you should have a platform that is always your one stop. This is where all our official news comes from all the time. This way, the news knows it, the news media knows it, and the public knows it.
Right. Well, I think, maybe it's my Army background, but I'm a big user of acronyms. So I have this acronym I use in training called CALM. And what it means is community awareness limits misinformation. And I believe that it does. I believe if you are being frequent, being fast with your response, even sharing the same information over and over till you have new information to share, I think that it helps limit misinformation, but not all of it. Like, I agree with you. So I would say the rule of thumb that I share is make sure that you're responding to that misinformation and not reacting, right? It's really easy to react. You want to respond and address the message and not the messenger. So you don't want to tag them in the response or anything like that. You just want to actively listen to where the narrative's going and what the challenges are. And then you want to actually insert yourself with a response that is full of the facts, right? We had a lot of this actually here in Alberta during the wildfires happening. We had people, different communities evacuating, and many felt they weren't being told the whole truth a little bit there. They felt that this response, is it really, why do I still have to be evacuated? Am I being unnecessarily delayed from returning home? There was a lot of misinformation, and that was a huge challenge for these municipalities. So I was working with one municipality, and what we kind of came up with was they tried posting images of the activity. So in this case, the images of the first responder at the scene, at the front lines, doing the fire guards with a little more frequency than they were doing, and then they were date stamping them. So the imagery was coming up with an active date, and if they could, they'd give a photo credit, right? And that. So sometimes they'd come from police or fire, giving them added credibility. But it was difficult to refute that were no firefighters fighting on a guard in a certain area when you could put a picture of it and show people. I almost feel today people need to see it to believe it. Now, I recognize that doesn't work in every scenario, but I feel if you're monitoring it and you can just keep putting factual information in over time, you're going to see if you can be correcting that information in a polite way. Actually it'd be more truthful to say this, almost like a bridging statement with media, or, here's a shot of our frontline firefighters today that came in from South Africa, let's give them an applause. And then, but then people recognize that's near the water tower. I recognize that. And it's date stamped today. At 3:00. So they were doing this today. I think that is what helps reinforce people. I don't know if that really answers the question, but
no, I think it does. Yeah.
If that helps,
yeah.
If they see it, they tend to believe it if it comes from that credible source.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's important to be frequent, be accurate, and I like the term respond instead of react. I think that's important because so many times we want to react because we want to tell that person, no, you're wrong. But the reality of it is all you're doing is it's like a Twitter war or a social media war where that person will just keep coming back at you, at the organization.
And I would say to you that when you get in those situations, it's kind of like baseball. Like, you give them a couple of tries and third strike and they're out in that space. You're taking it offline. You're asking them to DM you or to email you to kind of manage it, so you can give them more attention in that. And that's where I'm thinking the experience comes into play. So as you're responding and not reacting, you want to make sure that you have someone with the maturity that understands what the difference is there, that you're coaching them through how to manage that, because people are tired. They're working long hours. They're in a stressful environment. They're being asked to post a bazillion messages. And now all of a sudden they have someone who's beaking off, wah, 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 and they just want to put the hammer down, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they have to ease up a little bit and remember, right, what are my key messages? What are we sharing here right now? Is there additional information? Is there a photo, image, or a video I can attach to this?
Right. I agree. Shawna, I'm going to ask you a question that was not on the group of questions I gave you, but it's based on, you talked about this in the past, so this is where I got it from. The golden hour, why has that changed?
Well, I think it's social media, right? We used to have the golden hour and it's a little bit almost like we used to say the 24-hour news cycle. And now we're like, I don't know, the 24-second, probably millisecond, whatever it is, news cycle. But social media has created this time reduction space for us to operate in. So now I'm saying to clients, you have 15 minutes to reply, 15 to 30 max. And they're like, oh my gosh, we could never do that. But my point is, you can if you have an effective plan that includes legally approved holding statements that you can get out there just to take accountability of whatever it is that you don't even know the details of yet, and then start putting in place your plan. So that's how you get responding in that really quick time. I'm telling clients now, like, that's a big thing. Have your crisis comms plan written, signed off by leadership that gives comms teams and leaders or the PIO the authority to act instantly with an legally approved holding statement. Once you're hearing about it, in the end, it may not be anything, but you're looking into it, right? We're looking into this allegation. I think that, to me, we are down to that time, Robert, because social media, we are almost never the ones in control of our crisis. The train has left the station and we're running down behind the cars trying to catch up almost every time.
That is so true. All right, Shawna. So lastly, is there a question I should have asked, and what would have been your answer?
I would say, how can we better support PIO and comms teams? How can leaders better support them? Maybe even better than that. And I'm constantly, I know you are as well, a cheerleader and champion that we need organizations and leaders to respect the value that communications brings to the team. In an emergency situation, the public wants to feel safe and they want to feel informed. And they are using communication as the yardstick to measure the success or the failure of that response to that emergency. And communications is what supports a successful response. So I see in Canada, we have lots of training for operational roles. In my province, we've adopted the incident command system model for response for emergencies. We have lots of training for all those ICS team members. We haven't run a certified course except for a couple of FEMA courses that came up as part of a conference situation in over 12 years. And yet, we've had some of the most major disasters in Canada, and every after action report tells us that comms is the weak link. But I think it's because we haven't got those everyday communicators trained to do those jobs. So I would say to you, we need more leaders out there championing training, resources, funding, and support for the communications teams.
Oh my God. Training is always the first thing that they say we don't have any money for. And it's not budgeted. You can't go to it. You don't need it. It's so frustrating sometimes when you just want to attend a conference so that you can get the basics of what you need. And they say, well, we can't afford to send you there. And there's no local training anywhere.
But that's why I just commend people like you, Robert, that take the time to pull together these podcasts and bring people with different experiences and different perspectives on to have these discussions. Because every time I'm listening to one of yours, or I'm listening or reading what someone else is putting on a newsletter, I am taking away little golden nuggets every time. And I am almost literally adopting it the next day into something that I'm doing. And so we're all learning, right? It's a continuous cycle of improvement, I think, that we're on here. And so thank you for dedicating your own personal time to help the rest of us learn, because you're right. Sometimes we don't get offered these opportunities professionally.
Thank you. And this has been a passion project of mine since when I retired. I retired, kind of not abruptly, but there was a medical issue in my family, so I needed to take care of them. And after the medical issue was done, I was like, I got to find something to do. The podcast was a way for me to stay connected to the communications field And then I was like, okay, I want to come back. And I did. So, and I couldn't give it up then. Now it's grown into its own little thing. And I just love connecting with other communicators and learning what they've experienced or what they have to teach.
But you're providing this service back for all of these comms people too that can take an hour over, do a little lunch and learn on their lunch break and watch this and listen in. And I hope today they can take something away from this, our conversation, that they're going to implement in something they're doing in their role, because I think it's that exchange of ideas that's so incredibly important.
Thank you. All right. So let's change this up to some rapid fire questions. All right.
Okay.
Texting or talking?
Oh, clearly talking.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Adult drink of choice?
I like craft beer, wheat ales that are kind of have that fruit infusion, and I'm really liking the Stanley Park ales out of Vancouver right now.
Vanilla or chocolate?
Chocolate.
Do you have a pet?
I have two black labs. Whiskey, he's almost 12, and Oben, who's 3. And if you're a single malt drinker, people might get that connection there. I'm not taking any ownership of those names.
Is there a book or an author that's had an influence on you?
Oh, so many books. But the one I seem to quote the most is one I started to read early when I got into emergency management, and that was The Unthinkable by Amanda Ripley. That one really has resonated with me, and I do quote a lot of her book in different workshops. So that The Unthinkable.
I have read that. It's a good book. Ask permission or beg for forgiveness?
Oh, beg for forgiveness, absolutely.
Total PIO. If you could have coffee with any historical figure, who would you choose?
Well, do they have to be passed on? Because
No,
historically,
they could be any historical figure.
For me, it would have to be Jacinda Ardern, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand. I just think she's been an incredible force of and led through some incredible times in the history of her country with disasters. And I think she's just an amazing spokesperson and champion of the people. I'd buy her dinner.
There you go. Well, maybe she'll hear this and she'll call you. So final thoughts. What key points would you like our listeners to take from this interview?
As a PIO, take time to get prepared. 95% of what you need to have at your fingertips in a crisis, you can have ready beforehand. You're really only working about 5% in the crisis space. And always remember, you're wearing the public hat, so put people first in all of your actions.
Anything else you'd like to add?
Just I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, Robert, and to have this discussion. I'm obviously we're both very passionate about this topic, and it's nice to have a like-minded discussion a little bit here.
I agree. Shawna, how can people reach out to you or connect if they want to follow up on anything? Or
absolutely
your company?
Yeah, you can connect with me on Twitter at @SBruceCanada, and where I share crisis comms tips, or on LinkedIn if you want. I'm always sharing some information there. And if you need any kind of support or you want to check out some resources, you can go to my website at MD Bruce and Associates and put in crisis when you do that, because I get an accounting firm that comes up as well sometimes. So that is not me. I'm in this public communication space because I am not good in math. But I get those requests that come in through there almost immediately, and can connect with anyone. And I'm always very happy to share resources and whatever I can to help any organizations get more prepared and increase their resiliency as a comms team.
And I will add all of that into the show notes, so it'll be easy for them to find.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. Shawna, thank you very much for coming on the show. I appreciate it, and I look forward to talking to you in the future.
I do as well. So everyone just keep safe out there and keep doing what you're doing, because remember, your publics want to feel safe and feel informed, and that's the role we do.
That's all for this week. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Another huge thank you to the Social Media Strategies Summit for being a sponsor of the PIO podcast. Join their First Responders Summit this April or their Government Summit this May. Learn more about confirmed speakers and programming at socialmediastrategiessummit.com and use promo code PIO podcast for 10% off of your registration.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get notified of the latest episode. If you are listening on a platform that allows reviews, please give us a review. We appreciate any review, good or bad. It helps us improve on each episode. Until next time, be safe.